Our first speaker tonight is a long-standing friend and mentor of the group. He is an assistant professor of philosophy here at PSU, and I would like to thank him for generously giving some of his time to be here tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Peter Boghossian.
Thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is a particularly amazing evening for me. This is the first time I've ever met Sarah, and I've wanted to meet her for an awfully long time. I have been an amazing admirer of her work from afar. She truly is a portrait in courage, and if you haven't followed some of her work, I would urge you to do so. She lives in DC, and she's come to Portland tonight to speak to us. I'm going to read her bio. Sarah is an American writer, speaker, and activist. Born in Pakistan and raised in Texas, Sarah spent her early youth practicing Shi'a Muslim. In her late teens, she began to read the Quran critically and left religion soon after. In 2013, she co-founded Ex-Muslims of North America, where she advocates for the acceptance of religious dissent and works to create local support communities for those who have left Islam. In addition to atheism, Sarah is particularly passionate about civil liberties and women's rights. You can reach Sarah at Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at exmna.org. And on Twitter, it's at Sarah the Haider, Thehaider. And read more about EXMNA at exmna.org. So, few things. Sarah's going to give a talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A. We want to get as many questions as is possible in, so we ask that you just ask your question, stick it in 20 seconds, and we're going to move right along, and hopefully we can get a lot of questions in the 30 or 35 minutes that we have. This looks like a very reasonable group, and that fills me with tremendous joy. Was not quite expecting this, and I'm absolutely delighted to have that. I think that's a wonderful feature of Portland State University, and I like to thank everybody for being a civilized human being. Without further ado, here is Sarah all the way from Washington. Please give me a very, very warm Portland State welcome.
Do I need a special mic, or? I'm good. I'm good with this guy? Can everyone hear me? Oh. Well, this is not something I'm used to. I hope it works out okay. Well, thank you all for coming here. I'm doing something a little bit different than I normally do, where I'm not really going to lecture at you so much. I'm just going to give you a few points that I think we need to discuss. This is a topic, I can tell from the amount of people that are in this room, like, people want this to be discussed. We need honest conversations, and we need empathetic and compassionate conversations. But that space in the middle is disappearing, and I see it disappearing all the time. I find it difficult to talk about this topic, even though I am an ex-Muslim. I come from a Muslim background. I have Muslim family and friends who I love very much, and I want them to be treated as well as any citizen in the United States, and I want what's best for them. Part of the reason that I speak out against religion is because I think it harms Muslims. I think it harms Muslim societies. I think it makes progress very difficult in the communities that need it most. So I just want to talk to you, just have a few things that I think need to be discussed. Some things that are, I think, incorrect assumptions about Islam and its role, and some approaches that aren't really very helpful. And I don't have much time to go over all of this in detail. So it's just going to be a few things, and I hope it provides some food for thought. And I do want to say that this is not a final word on anything. I don't consider myself some big expert on Islam. I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be something that compassionate people talk about and really take seriously. So before I do that, a little bit about me. I was raised Muslim. And I spent the majority of my life in the United States. Although I am an immigrant, I was born in Pakistan, and my family is Pakistani. I left religion in my late teens for most of the reasons that anybody really leaves religion. It doesn't really make sense to them anymore, or the moral, the moral requirements don't really work for them. The biggest problem with me and with Islam was that it just didn't seem like something that was true. and Islam claimed to have truth about the way that the world was, about the way that reality was, and I just felt like that was not something that I believed in, and I didn't want to live my life according to something that I knew was very, very likely not true. Today, I work with ex-Muslims of North America. I co-founded the organization in 2013. I'm sorry, my mouth is so dry. And we work to promote secular values, to mitigate the costs of apostasy, and to reduce discrimination by those who leave Islam. One of the ways we mitigate the cost of apostasy, for example, is that we build communities. We build communities of ex-Muslims. And if anyone is really familiar with this topic, they'll know that this is just an impossible task. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be in the United States such an impossible task, but it is. A lot of ex-Muslims are afraid of their families and friends. They're afraid of being disowned. They're afraid of losing touch with the people that they care about more than anything else. And they're afraid of abuse. They're afraid of physical abuse. They're afraid of verbal abuse. And many make the choice to stay in the closet. We use a lot of gay rights terminology because we think that it works really well for us. But a lot of us choose to stay in the closet because nobody wants to risk losing the people that they love most. And ex-Muslims in particular, many of us are immigrants, many of us are people of color. So we're already people that feel marginalized in the society, and then you add another layer of that, you lose your family and your friends, that becomes something almost unbearable. So we build communities of apostates, and what we do is very cloak and dagger. We have these screenings, but no one can join without speaking to some people and going through this whole process. The meetings are completely secret. We have now communities, I think, in over 18 cities in the United States and Canada, and we're really proud of that, and they're functioning and they're meeting and they're helping and support each other. Now, I want everyone to pay attention to the fact that this is something that shouldn't need to exist. There's no reason that in the Western world, ex-Muslims, people who just left a faith, should feel the need to go through all these procedures and process to feel safe, to feel like they can just be somewhere where they can just be themselves, they can open up. This shouldn't have to happen, but across the world there are many countries that still punish apostasy with death, and there are many Muslim communities, even in the West, that will hurt even the people that they love most if it comes down to the case of apostasy. And I want especially to point out to the fact that we talk a lot about freedom of religion, and we talk a lot about specific religious traditions. We'll talk about the hijab and we'll say, is it a choice, is it not a choice? But what we don't talk about is if in the broader religion, if the most fundamental freedom that can be given to anyone in a religion, which is the right to have it or to leave it, isn't really granted to people in the Muslim world, then what is this conversation about anyway? This most fundamental freedom needs to be protected. So today I just want to talk about the particular challenge we have with Islam. I want to give my thoughts on the ways that Islam is kind of unique or not so unique, and how that should reflect on how we approach it. Now, I want to start by saying this. I think that there are a lot of liberals and leftists who are too easy on Islam, who are approaching this in entirely the wrong way. But I will maintain, I still think that they're doing it for wonderful reasons, for reasons that touch me. And even, I think some of you guys might have known there was this show on Bill Maher. There was Sam Harris, and there was Batman, and they were talking about religion, and I remember that I liked that there was somebody who was defending Muslims in that sort of a visceral way. I liked that somebody was feeling like, I need to protect people. They're weak and they're persecuted and I want to protect them. I liked that idea. But he was wrong. He was wrong about the way to approach the issue. In any case, let me talk a little bit about what Islam is and a little bit of misconceptions that people have. I think most of you will know that it is an Abrahamic religion, which means that it is similar to Christianity in a lot of ways, but it is dissimilar in ways that need to be adequately considered. I look at it as kind of a pre-Enlightenment Christianity, in which to say that the tolerance is low, violence in the name of the faith is acceptable in vast majorities, and science is not really a trusted way to understand the world, then revelation seems to always trump reason. Islamic text, one thing we need to really get clear, is different than Judeo-Christian scriptures, so that will reveal itself in the ways that Muslims practice their faith. But it isn't all that different. After all, it is a branch of the same tree. I kind of look at it as, you know, a rip-off of a rip-off almost, but something very similar to the Bible, almost as if somebody was taking the Bible and then tracing it and then painting it in a slightly different way with some deliberate mistakes. It is a very similar religion, and in broad strokes, you see similar kinds of tendencies. You see this inferior status of women, you see an obsession with sexual purity, and a desire to squelch heresy wherever you see it, and even sexual deviancy. Generally, Islam believes in the biblical prophets and most of the miracles that are ascribed to them. And so that makes it a very similar religion in a lot of ways with similar myths. But one thing just to note, just a quick note, this is not super important, but the Quran is much shorter than the Bible. It was revealed much later, and this has important implications for what the text actually says. It's a shorter text, so there's less contradictions, internal contradictions, and logical issues within it. So I think it's kind of more coherent than the Bible, in my opinion anyway. And it is more in line with modern science. That's not to say that it's in line with it at all. It isn't. But it's more in line. It was revealed later, at a later time anyway. So the common knowledge at that time had evolved. And so as far as science is concerned, it's not as backwards, I think, as Christianity. But to get to more important aspects of it, the Quran is considered God's literal word, the perfect word, not events told by other men, but this is God speaking to you, which means that there isn't a lot of wiggle room when it comes to Islam. And the extent to which Muslims are willing to change their faith is reflected by that, right? They don't really bend to the wills of modern society in the way that Christians might, because there is less wiggle room when it comes to the actual text. I think there is, from my experience, much more wiggle room in Christianity. And Christianity has a tradition of being taken figuratively. Islam does have another set of scriptures, some of you may have heard of them, called the Hadith, and they are less revered overall, and there's discussions for which Hadith are important and which are not important. But suffice to say that that's different. The Quran in itself is perfect, and it is a complete manual and the most pure way that you can live your life here on earth, and that's important. Because there are some things in the Quran that are not so modern. There are some things in the Quran that are not so friendly to modern values. In my opinion, though, the same trait that makes Islam less likely to bend to modern wills is also something that makes it more likely to break. Which is to say, from an ex-Muslim perspective, when I was told that the Quran is a perfect book, it is the most perfect book in existence, when you find a flaw, it's that much more devastating, because there shouldn't be any flaws at all. So there's less tolerance for incoherency, there's less tolerance for that sort of thing. In addition, there isn't really an intense critical tradition in Islam, which is to say, there isn't a tradition of people criticizing the religion at all, really not at all. And this is a bad thing in some ways, and it can be a good thing if you are a secularist like me who wants to see the end of religion. Bad news is that Muslims are not willing to tolerate dissent to the extent Jews and Christians are. They're not used to it. And they don't have the same kind of doubts about their faith. They feel that the vast majority of them feel that their faith is 100% the true word of God. The good news is that they never really encountered pushback, either from a logical or human rights perspective, or even a scientific one. So from a perspective of an ex-Muslim, this makes it something that when you do approach it with a scientific perspective or a human rights perspective, it's easy to brush aside religion. In addition, Islam is, and I think this is something that people don't really want to absorb, it's that Islam is a political religion. It is political at its very root. There isn't a strong tradition of secularism in the Muslim world, and many consider secularism as a concept to be blasphemous. Some people do actually also consider democracy to be blasphemous, but those are usually extremists. In any case, this is something that goes back to Muhammad himself. He was a head of state as well as a head of the religion. So this is something that is deeply a part of religion. So when you're trying to argue for secularism in a Muslim context, you're really telling them that there was something that their prophet did, who they considered to be a perfect example, that wasn't quite right. And that's not going to be taken so well. Finally, and I think this is very important, and I think this is a hard pill to swallow, that Muslims are, on average, far more intense in their religious beliefs. We have reams and reams of data about this. There's hundreds of polls if you want to look them up, so I won't go over this in detail because I think you can just Google it if you really wanted to Google it. I would recommend the Pew Social Attitudes polls to look into this issue, and you can take a look just country by country. You can see the similarities in Muslim countries as well, and you can see, especially in terms of women's rights and LGBT rights and all those things, you can see that there are similar trends that go across, and it's related to religion. What this means is that Muslim moderates, or what we would consider a moderate, someone maybe average, the average Muslim, will look different than the average Christian moderate, or what we consider a Christian moderate, or what we consider the average Jewish moderate. They will look different. They will be more like what we consider very conservative people. The average person in Pakistan, if you were just to pick up an average person in Pakistan, you're going to get somebody that is much more conservative in their values and their beliefs than somebody you would get in the Western world. And that's just something that we have to accept, so we can talk about, you know, what does a moderate Muslim look like, and what do we want from Muslims. I also think there are some problems with the approach that the way that we approach Islam. Specifically, I think that there is a difference with the way that people acknowledge difference, which is that they don't. They don't say that, they don't agree that Islam is really a very different religion, and Muslims have different social beliefs and values, and we need to acknowledge that. Those differences need to be acknowledged, but they're not being acknowledged. At the same time, Islam is kind of given a special treatment in the media, and especially within leftist circles. So you have this like dual, just this thing that just doesn't seem to work out, and it will put us in a position, I think, where we will harm the very values we care about. For one, Islam is consistently treated as a race, and every time I bring this up and I say Islam is not a race, people say, well, of course not. Of course it's not a race, I know that. But we do treat it as a race. We often treat Islam as a race. We use this word, Islamophobia, which doesn't really make a lot of sense in any other context. It conflates the criticism of the religion with a hatred for the people. And that makes conversations very difficult. That makes a conversation when you're talking about what may be the issues with Islam, it makes it an inherently racist conversation. It makes it something where racial attitudes are just infused with it, just by definition, because of the way that the word is defined. We need to step away from this word. This word is not helpful. I think what we can use, and what we should use, is anti-Muslim bigotry. Because Muslims do experience bigotry. I know, because I'm an ex-Muslim. People perceive me to be a Muslim, and I experience sometimes, one time actually, I was going to an atheist conference. I was walking across the street to the atheist conference, and someone yelled a slur at me that they would yell to Muslims. And this sort of thing does happen. It's not uncommon, it's not so rare. A lot of people say that it's just people crying victim, but it actually is a real thing. It's a real concern. So one thing I want to just stamp in is that the word Islamophobia doesn't really help the debate. And what happens when we actually conflate these two concepts? I think one, it chills the conversation on Islam by convincing compassionate people who may be confused by this term to step away, to not voice the concerns that they may be having. Because the reasoning goes, what if I am adding to bigotry? What if I'm making things worse for Muslims that I care about? I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to speak up. And what happens is that these compassionate people in the middle, who really should be participating, who really should be talking about this issue, are the ones that silence themselves, that censor themselves. And what we're left is two polar opposites that are just yelling noise at each other. We're not having this conversation. So it's really important to make this distinction. I think it also puts Muslims in harm's way. If there isn't a strong, clear, totally crystallized distinction between the religion and the people, then any backlash to Islamic extremism will necessarily be taken out on the people, on Muslims. We're already seeing this kind of thinking being solidified. You guys know about the Muslim ban, this idea that the only thing we can do is we have to get rid of the Muslims. And that's not true. What we're waging is an ideological war, an ideological battle. And this needs to be handled through reason, through compassion, through honesty, and through evidence. Another concept that I think isn't very helpful, an approach to this that I think isn't very helpful, is that there's an idea sort of floating around that religions have rights, that cultures have rights that need to be respected. Just let's be clear about this. Religions don't have rights. Cultures don't have rights. People have rights. People do have a right to practice their religion as they see fit, but their right to practice their religion shouldn't allow them to harm anyone else, shouldn't allow them to overstep other people's human rights. I'll give you an example of this. I don't know how many of you are aware of this case, but there were some people that were being arrested in Detroit for FGM. They were practicing female genital mutilation on some young girls, and there have been some arrests that have been made. And the defense lawyer, that's going to trial, the defense lawyer is saying that they will use religious freedom as the argument in their defense. And they think that this should be, this approach to this seems to be effective to a lot of people, and I think too many people give it any credibility at all. Related to this is this idea of blasphemy, that I or anyone else should limit our exercises of speech in order not to offend anyone. This is another case where we give religion a right over our civil liberties. If offense in general is something that we decide as a society we need to just knock out, then that's something else. But if I call somebody stupid, that's not against any rules. That's not considered hate speech. So the idea that we should consider speech that offends religious sensibilities as something different is something that we need to get rid of. It's not helpful at all. I think the solution to this is pretty simple. It is that we acknowledge that, that Islam is very different, and that even though it is different as a religion, we treat it the same way we treat any bad idea. We treat it as a lot of people treated Christianity when they thought Christianity was causing a lot of harm in the world, which is we treat it as an ideology with some problems. We criticize it, we ridicule it if that's what needs to happen, but we try and force people to change their minds. We persuade them. We do what we can to persuade people, and then the ideology changes. We need to view Muslim conservatism with the same suspicion that we view Christian conservatism, and use reason to argue against it while remaining compassionate towards the people. And finally, we need to view Muslims as people who can be persuaded. They're not a race. They're people who just happen to hold certain ideologies. Ex-Muslims are proof that there are people who believe certain things and then they change their mind. And then they adopt a different set of codes and a different set of values to live their life by. We're proof that change happens. And change happens even when there are dire consequences for change happening. Just what I want to end on, I know I've been talking probably too long, is that I think that we stand to lose a lot if we don't have this honest conversation, if we don't change our approach to Islam and to the problem of conservatism specifically arising from Islam. People are losing trust in media, specifically in progressive media and its leftist media. I'm seeing this happening all the time. I see this happening everywhere. And I see this as a very dangerous thing, particularly for progressives, particularly for people on the left and for leftist values. People see that there is a hypocrisy here, that people treat Muslim conservatism differently than they would conservatism of any other religion. And they resent that. And then they lose trust in whatever institution that is displaying this sort of hypocrisy. I fear that if this continues to happen, they will place their faith in people that are far worse, people who are maybe actual bigots, and this will mean that Muslims will suffer more in the end. Because if there's only one person who's discussing the problem as it actually is, that's the person that people are going to give their attention to. That's the person that people are going to now trust to find a solution, and we don't want that. We want it to be that there are compassionate people, the people that care about Muslims and care about their civil liberties, to be the ones that are participating in this conversation. We don't want to lose the right to speak about this. I also think that on a broader level, if we're going to be hypocrites when it comes to rights, particularly women's rights, in broader context of human rights, we're losing something very important. In an effort to shield Muslims, to prevent Muslims from being targeted by bigotry, I think we're losing our ability to speak freely about problems as we see them. That is a danger in society. We need to be able to speak about this and to know that we're not going to be slandered if we do it. I also think that when we cow to religious demands in any way, we're losing our ability to fight for human rights. And in the end, that should be something that people on the left care about, people who are liberal care about. Now, the reason I talk a lot about the left, I talk a lot about liberalism, is because that is who I am. I am a liberal. These liberal values are the values that moved me. And when I was leaving religion, those were the values that made me think that, okay, maybe I deserve more from society. Maybe I as a woman should have equal rights as a man. I felt differently about it because of liberal values. I don't want these values to be eroded. I don't want them to be harmed, but they will be if we're not going to be honest about this issue. Do we have time, Andy, to have some questions? Okay, I'd just like to have some questions. I'm sorry I wasn't particularly eloquent. This was just something I wanted to say, and
Oh, that was great. That was great. Do you want me to take the questions? Thank you. Do you want me to take the questions and them too, or do you want to take them? Okay, so let's see if we can get in as many questions as we can. So if you could keep it to 20 or 30 seconds, that would be fantastic. And we saw you with your hand up first in the front. I'm going to hold the mic, though.
Thank you. Very good presentation, and thank you for your work. These 18 ex-Muslim communities, how would it be different, or would it be better if those were communities for all excommunicated religions, Mormonism, Scientology, that kind of thing?
I have a lot of contacts within other ex-fundamentalist type groups. And while I do think that there are ways that we can work together, and we're trying to work together, because there's a lot of similarities. We go through, anytime I meet an ex-fundamentalist of any background, there's a sense of resonance. Oh, you know what I'm going through. You know what my issues are. I still think that Muslims go through something very particular, because it's not just people who come from fundamentalist Muslim backgrounds that face stigma with their apostasy. It's people that come from moderate backgrounds. It's people that come from even liberal backgrounds. So it's a much broader issue in Islam. I think something in particular that is important to people who join the communities is that they want to be around people from the same backgrounds. They want to be able to talk about these issues without getting into the whole bigotry aspect of it. Because when you're with other, people of color, immigrants, you can sort of speak your mind about things, and you can feel comfortable about speaking about this issue without running into any of that. Because sometimes people do run into that. There is such a thing as anti-Muslim bigotry. It does turn up, even in atheist secular circles. So I think that's a source of comfort for people too.
All right, well, I saw a hand right here.
Hi, welcome. I am an ex-Muslim. I left Islam when I was 15 years old, and I want to talk about how in the Quran there is a big concept of us against them. I mean, in the Quran, 2nd chapter, we have God dividing the world between believers and non-believers.
Sorry, what was your question?
In the Quran, 2nd chapter, God divides the world between believers and non-believers.
Should you want her to comment on that? Could you comment on that?
Well, I mean, if I wanted to, one thing that I was thinking about when I was going through this list of things that people should consider, there's a lot of ways that Islam is different. And it does approach the world in a more political way, in a way that warfare is a stronger part of Islam, and that is something that we need to consider, and that is something we need to grapple with. I don't have anything specific to say, and that's one of the things that we need to accept as something that is motivating too many Muslims, if not all, if not most. Too many Muslims do look at the world in that way, and that is something that we need to just be honest about, at the very least.
Wow, a lot of questions I'm going to go down here. I saw you with your hand. Hi.
Hi, I'm an ex-Muslim, and I just wanted to know, like, when I'm having conversations with family, it's just like, I feel like I don't get to say what I want to say because I'll just have to agree with them and be like, okay, because I just don't feel comfortable expressing my beliefs because I don't want to be rejected, or it's just not a safe space. So do you have any, do you have any comment about that?
Good question.
Well, I have, so there's a variety of ways you can approach this. The way I did was just one little drop at a time, where I wasn't entirely honest with all my doubts at once, but I just sort of tested the waters here and there to see how they would react. Because one thing that I would like to make sure that you and any other ex-Muslim is paying attention to is that you never really know how they will react. And this could be a very bad thing, where there are people who I know that come from relatively liberal backgrounds, or so they thought it was liberal background. But as it turned out, that when the issue came to apostasy, their parents were not very forgiving. On the other hand, I know people that come from pretty conservative backgrounds, and their parents have been surprisingly just I guess polite about the issue, which is sometimes the best that you can hope for. So I would say that throw a little bit out there. If you're not financially independent, you should be financially independent. You should have, before you start this conversation, at least you should be already graduating, or you should have graduated. You should have an ability to make a living by yourself. You don't want to be put on the street. If worse comes to worse, it does happen. So you don't want to put yourself in that position.
All right, let's see some hands. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So the other day, Peter was also in the class that I was in, and I expressed my distress about women who wear the hijab. I know that it can be culture, can be religious. I think it gets a little bit convoluted, but when I know that there are women over in certain countries who are forced into it, and I see a woman over here who's wearing it, it does upset me. And I want to know your feelings on the hijab, and could you elaborate a little bit on it for me?
Sure. I could write several books about how I feel about the hijab, but it goes back to a broader conception of women, where the most important thing about the woman is her sexual chastity and her modesty, and the idea that if a woman is exposing her body, it isn't just shameful on her, but it somehow is attacking the man with her sexuality. Like, it's offensive to him, and it could harm him. So there's these bizarre ways of talking about women's sexuality that I think we need to, at the very least, be honest about. And again, I'm asking for just a basic level. Let's be honest about this. When I saw that the Women's March, which is something, that it was such a powerful thing to see all these women come together and who cared about these issues, willing to just come into DC, and there were so many, and it was an amazing thing. And then when I saw that there was somebody with a hijab, and the idea that her picture with a hijab being displayed, and it was this big marker for women's freedom, I thought that was tasteless. That's the nicest way I can phrase it, is that I thought it was incredibly tasteless to have this image of a woman in a hijab in a march for women's rights. I think that's one of the ways in which we're very hypocritical when it comes to women's rights and human rights. And again, that was something I touched on, but I could just go on forever about, which is that we need to, if women's, the policing of women's sexuality is bad in one instance, then it's bad in all instances. You shouldn't be able to just say, well, this is their culture, and I respect that they have a difference in culture. That's not enough. You shouldn't tolerate certain things, and you shouldn't tolerate mistreatment of women. You shouldn't tolerate the idea that women are second-class citizens. There are many countries in the Muslim world where it's enshrined in law that women are different legally than men. Women have different inheritance rights. A lot of people probably know of the idea that 2 female witnesses equal 1 male witness in an Islamic court. And that's a really disgusting idea. That's something that doesn't belong anywhere in today's society. And I respect a woman's right to wear the hijab. I respect her choice. I'm against banning the burkini or anything like that. I'm against banning them. I think women should have a right to wear it. But I also think we should speak out about what it actually is, and what it is needs to be discussed. So there's just an idea, it's a woman's choice, that's it. It's a woman's choice, she's wearing that, and that garb represents a lot of things that are toxic.
Okay, let's go over to this side. Hi.
Hi, thank you for coming. Richard Dawkins recently came out and said that Christianity might be a suitable tool in which to combat the rise of Islam. Do you think that it would be a useful strategy, or do you think it would be equivocal to exchanging one poison for another?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we do need to make clear is that there's a difference between the way that average Christians practice their faith. So if you're going to convert an average Muslim in the way they practice it to the way that an average Christian practices his faith, you might see a little bit of improvement. But I don't think that it's a solution. It's just a Band-Aid for something that we really need to target head on. What I think we need to do is instill doubt about the truth of the faith. And that's something I think people in the West can't really relate to, because people in the West don't really understand the level of certainty that people in the East, especially in Muslim countries, have regarding their religion. They really do believe it is true. They believe Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse. Educated, progressive people believe this. I was actually watching it was Richard Dawkins and Mehdi Hasan, I believe, who is a prominent journalist. He's well known, he's progressive. He's a smart guy, speaks very intellectually. And Dawkins said something about people believing in flying space horses, and he said something like, well, I will give you the courtesy of assuming that you don't actually believe that, pointing to Mehdi. And Mehdi says, well, no, I do believe that. I do believe that. And it's one of those things that, you know, that even this intellectual, progressive, educated, high society type guy believes in such a thing. So can you imagine where moderates are? Can you imagine where actual conservatives are? So I think we need to just start talking about, hey, this is probably not real. It probably didn't happen at all. The Quran was written, you know, decades at least after, you know, all the events that happened in it took place. That's a long time. That's a long time for hearsay. You know, we don't really know what happened, and those little types of facts and details help you know, somebody who's really entrenched in Islam sort of lose that certainty a little bit, and that's all of that is helpful.
All right, we are doing exceptionally well with people asking direct questions and moving on. We're really getting through them.
Hello, thanks so much for coming. I just had a quick question. How do you think the United States, or at least as citizens, we can promote the intellectual and social infrastructure for ex-Muslim societies that are outside of North America? So, for example, I feel as if an ex-Muslim association might face tremendous challenges in places like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. How do you think we can positively affect change in those places?
That's a good question. So as far as affecting change in Saudi Arabia and in Pakistan, that's something that to do directly would be pretty difficult at this point, given the risks that people take in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. If you speak out, if you're revealed to be an atheist or a blasphemer, it's a very real chance that you'll get killed, hacked to death in some brutal way. And it's not an end that anyone wants to meet. And so as far as people becoming very open about their disbelief in those parts of the world, I think first of all, it's amazing that many people are speaking out. They're in Saudi Arabia. There was a poll that said that 5% of Saudi Arabians don't really believe in religion. That's amazing. That's a lot of people in Saudi Arabia to not really believe. So I think there are people that are taking a lot of risks, but to tackle that directly is going to be difficult. What we can do is make sure that when we are talking about religion here, we're not sending mixed signals, because we are sending mixed signals right now. We are saying some kinds of conservatism is okay, some kinds of religious orthodoxy is okay, and those are confusing. And people in the East and people in Muslim worlds, people all over the world are listening to this thing, especially given the power of the internet. We're all connected. I was reading something about how Richard Dawkins' God Delusion was downloaded like 10 million times or something in the Muslim world. This was the Arabic translation of the God Delusion that was downloaded over 10 million times. That's amazing. That means that there's a hunger for this kind of knowledge. There are people who want to read about this. They're curious about this. They don't get this knowledge anywhere else. At the very least, we can be honest. We can give them these kinds of tools so that they can think about it and they can talk about it in a non-free society. And so to the extent that, to go back to your question, the way that I think that we can help them is by cleaning house first at home, which is not clean. Right now, we're not honest about this issue. We're not tackling it directly head on. So how are we going to support them? What are we going to say in defense of their rights against religious encroachment if we're not defending it here?
Okay, I saw a question back here. Hi.
About 10 years ago or more, Irshad Manji wrote the book The Trouble with Islam, in which she started to articulate some of what she said were misinterpretations of the Quran by major leaders in the Muslim faith. And I'm wondering if you've done any work with her. I think it would be very engaging to see the two of you have a conversation together, because it seems in some ways that what you've done is to build upon some of the foundation that she set in just starting to do the questioning. And thanks for coming to Portland.
Well, thank you for having me. I haven't, to answer your question, I haven't worked with her directly as of yet, but she is somebody that I find to be incredibly courageous. I don't agree with her. I don't really agree with the Reform Project so much. Again, I think we need to instill doubt, which is a different project altogether. But I think that allies like Irshad Manji and reformist Muslims as a whole, they're really important people that we need to give a stage, because that shows diversity. It shows diversity in Muslim thought as well. And we need diversity. We need dissent against orthodoxy. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Okay, let me move to the front again. And when do you want the last question? I think it's 7:49, 7:50 now. If we have time for a few more?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 more.
Okay. I saw you, sir.
Yeah, so the useful leftist response to this problem seems to be Majid Nawaz's Islam versus Islamism approach, and Shadi Hamid, Islamic exceptionalism, that there is a problem with Islam in itself, and the West should accept that Islam is anti-secularism in its very nature. Which one is more useful? Is it the idea that there is something called abstract idea that there's Islamism and it's divorced from Islam, or the one that no, Islam and Islamism come together, and that's the problem? That's the only two things that two ideological movement that I saw on the left that actually confront this problem.
Right, and it's actually pretty rare that you see a book like those two books, you know. So it's interesting that it's happening, and I'm glad that it's happening. I agree with some aspects of both approaches, in that, as far as categories of Muslims are concerned, people like to just, you know, point, this is an Islamist and this is a conservative and reformist and all these things. What's interesting to me is I don't think many Muslims look at themselves in those terms. I think Muslims see themselves as, you know, a Shi'a Muslim or a Sunni Muslim. They'll ascribe to themselves the ideology, and some of them are less observant than others, bad Muslims versus good Muslims, like in the sense that some are not really doing what they should be doing. But I don't see a lot of progressive thought really developing in the Muslim world, and I don't see Muslims really using that label with themselves. I don't see Muslims calling themselves progressive Muslims or moderate Muslims or conservatives. I don't really see them using these labels. I wonder what the use is of dividing people in these ways, especially when I know a lot of progressive Muslims. Those are the kinds of people that will still tolerate me and you know, speak with me and call me a friend. But many of them believe in everything that a conservative Muslim believes in. It's just that they're not doing it. So they'll tell me, oh, well, I drink, I go out, you know, maybe I date, and I do all these things, but it's because I'm weak. It's because I'm weak. Something's wrong with my own character, right? They'll point at their own flaws. They won't say, there's something wrong with this idea. And that's what we need to go to. We need to start talking about the idea as a whole doesn't really make sense.
Okay, we have one more. Sir, you had your hand up. I tried to get to you. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So I saw by the way, I liked your interview with Godsad on YouTube.
Thank
That was
you.
pretty cool. So my question was, I was actually going to ask you about arguably the largest Islamic network who introduced the word Islamophobia, the Muslim Brotherhood. On the one hand, they sponsor, Muslim students associations on campuses so that, Muslims can put on events and, reach out to their fellow students. Okay, great. But then on the other hand, they go out and they sort of passively endorse groups like Hamas. And then, people like CARE come out and say, well, it's complicated. Hamas, Israel, you can't really say one is right or wrong. Yeah, okay. So what are your thoughts on the Muslim Brotherhood? Are they a toxic movement, or are they sort of a vehicle in which we can sort of integrate secularism and pluralism?
I don't think we can bring in secularism or pluralism through a religious lens. I think just on the whole, not to talk about that party in particular, but you see this happening in a lot of emerging democracies. You'll see democracy maybe starting up in the Middle East, and then an Islamist party or a religiously themed party will take over. We'll support them because they seem moderate at the time. They always seem moderate at first, and then they sort of hijack the movement towards the movement that wanted greater freedoms, greater democracy, and they'll sort of hijack it and take control of the narrative. When we have these discussions about democracy as a whole, I think it's important. Democracy is important to liberalization of society, but what is more important is the guarantee of civil liberties. Somebody like this, a group like the Muslim Brotherhood would not be as dangerous if ex-Muslims like me, apostates like me, or people who are even reformist Muslims, dissenting Muslims, were allowed to speak their minds about religion and convince and persuade people, if there was allowed to be diversity on this issue, and those people were protected, because right now they're not protected. And one good way to take care of dissent is by violence. Violence is the ultimate veto, and it works. It works exceptionally well. So until we can really take civil liberties and put them at the forefront of Muslim communities, then a moderate party won't really make much of a change.
Okay, everyone, I'd like to thank everybody tonight for coming. A very, very good group with a good discussion, and I really appreciate how we had a civil conversation tonight. So please, everybody, nice round of applause for Sarah.
Thank you.